One of the greatest disappointments about the Vending series never leaving Japan is that we missed out on a lot of really interesting, unique card gimmicks. Of course, one of the most interesting from that series that we're going to be talking about today is Vending Hypno, which has the Puppet Master Pokemon power, which lets you use this Hypno's Mind Shock attack through an active Clefairy. So in essence, you have a Clefairy in the active position. You are using Hypno's Mind Shock attack through it as long as Hypno itself has the 2 energy attached. And if the Clefairy gets knocked out, your opponent doesn't get to take a prize, so you're essentially able to attack with a no-risk attacker, dealing decent chunks of damage turn after turn, as long as Hypno isn't, gusted into the active position and knocked out. So nothing really game-breaking here, it's just a fun deck that had a mechanic that we really missed out on when we did not get this Vending series in North America. So I set out to develop a fun, consistent deck that utilized this card and its effect. So let's get right on into what I came up with. Because it's almost Halloween, I have allowed my playmat to costume as another card game. So we're going to be starting out with the Rocket Drowsy because it's really good. Its Pokemon Power Long Distance Hypnosis can allow you to potentially put your opponent's active to sleep, and you don't have to worry about putting your own active to sleep because it's going to be Clefairy. And Clefairy cannot be affected by special conditions. So because Hypno isn't going to be dealing any huge amounts of damage, this actually helps you out a lot. By putting your opponent's active to sleep, you're potentially buying more time to just stack 30 damage at a time. So it's going to be a 4/4 playset of Drowsy Hypno. And then for support, I kind of went back and forth, tried a bunch of different things, but still landed on a couple copies of Lickitung because it's amazing. Probably the most underrated card of the Wizards of the Coast era. And it also helps cover Hypno's weakness. And so you can use Lickitung as another source of just dealing tiny tidbits of damage, potentially stalling out your opponent for your setup. And for the other support card, it's going to be Fossil Mr. Mime, which is going to help you deal with decks that are dealing huge amounts of damage, because you can move in that Mr. Mime, of course, and completely prevent that damage and kind of force your opponent to have to switch into those Pokemon that only deal 10 or 20 damage at a time. So in a way, there's a lot of stall in this deck because your opponent's not taking prizes from the Clefairy they're knocking out. Mr. Mime can stall out high damage decks, and Lickitung can just stall in general. All to make room for Hypno to get in as many Mind Shocks as possible. Another great thing about Clefairy is that it can't retreat, but you can discard it at any time. And so if you just go, this strategy isn't actually going to work, I'm better off just relying on Mr. Mime for the rest of the game, then you can just discard it and not even have to worry about you losing an energy or anything for it. And then we also do have Item Finder in the deck just so you can revive those Clefairy from your discard and basically just recycle them. Your draw power is going to be coming from a full playset of Bill and a couple copies of Professor Oak. If you are finding yourself relying a lot more on Hypno's Mind Shock through Clefairy, then I would say go ahead and go for a full playset of Item Finder. That way you can recycle them as much as possible. This build is more of a general purpose deck in that it's got enough coverage options that it can really take on multiple different matchups. But again, like every deck I post on here, it's all up to your individual playstyle and how you're going to move things around. A couple copies of Computer Search just to make sure if you need a Lickitung, you can get a Lickitung when you need it. For the same reason there's a couple copies of Good Manners in here. That way you can get at least one Drowsy onto your bench, even if you've already evolved another one up into a Hypno, just because its power is going to be so useful. 4 copies of Lass, because Gust of Wind and Super Energy Removal can really deal a heavy blow to this deck. So you want to be using the trainers out of your hand, then playing Lass. Same, Lass protocol for every other deck that it's in. But you want to keep your opponent from playing those heavy hitting cards against you as much as possible. On the flip side of that, we're going to be running a full playset of Energy Removal and 3 copies of Super Energy Removal ourselves, because the Pokemon in this deck don't require a whole lot of energy. Lickitung only needs 1, Mr. Mime only needs 2, Hypno only needs 2. And so if you find yourself, with just some extra energy that you can attach to your Pokemon at the end of your turn, then go ahead and use a super energy removal. That's going to further stall out your opponent, keep them from really knocking out anything like a Lickitung or a Hypno. 60 HP is still pretty decent for this format, and you're going to be running a few copies of Gust yourself, just so you can stack that damage onto the Pokemon you want to be stacking on, because your opponent's going to be switching back and forth a lot, and you're going to need some help if you get gusted, which is why there's also a few copies of Warp Point in here, just to make sure if you get stuck with a Lickitung in the active position, you want to be able to get that Clefairy doll back into the active as quick as possible. Well, the fastest way to do that is probably with Warp Point, or a switch, depending on your preference. And then finally, we're going to top off the deck with 2 copies of Nightly Garbage Run, just to recycle your energy and your Pokemon. And then 12 Psychic Energy, which may seem like cutting it a little close on the low side, but you also have to think that the Mr. Mime and the Lickitung are going to be very situational, depending on your matchup, or depending on your opening hand, really. And a lot of times, you're going to lean way more on the side of Hypno's Mind Shock. And so then, you know, you got to think of how you're actually spreading out your energy. It's not going to be you're using Mr. Mime and Hypno a lot. But other than that, general strategy is pretty straightforward. This deck, at the end of the day, does have a lot of weaknesses. It isn't overly powerful or anything, but it is fun, and it uses a mechanic that you're not going to see ever. If you're wanting to adapt it for a format that has a few more sets like Rocket On, pretty much all you would have to do is replace the Mime and the Lickitung with Cleffa, maybe throw in a Tyrogue, and of course you would have to shift around the trainer base a little bit, but the core would remain the same just with Cleffa, which is now a much cheaper and much more available card thanks to Celebrations. And I really don't have a lot of other talking points for this deck, so I will leave it to you guys to let me know down in the comments what I should have said about this deck. But also let me know down there what decks you want to see on the channel, what types of content you want added. As always, thanks for watching. Social media links down in the description, and I guess I'll see you next video. Bye.